Bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, friends, so in this Dhamma talk, I want to continue on in the exploration of the practice of meditation. And again, meditation, goes in stages, and the mind has to be prepared for different sort of levels or stages of concentration and mindfulness, and especially the specific kinds of insight that we cultivate, especially in the Buddhist teaching, especially in the Theravada teaching about mindfulness and the Vipassana meditation. Because there's all kinds of meditation teachings out there, it's almost infinite, the various things that people call meditation. And even within Buddhism, there's lots of different things and kinds of meditation. And basically they all lead to different experiences. And they're not necessarily all the same, because it depends on the direction of your mind. It's like a scientist. Let's say, scientists, they want to discover a cure for COVID, for example, or could be cancer. And they take different hypotheses. They start from different kind of angles, and some of them wind up in dead ends, or some of them wind up in not certain type of results. But depending on a few particular scientists who have maybe some different viewpoints or insights, they take a slightly different, looking at different types of proteins or different types of, I don't know the names of all these scientific things, amino acids and so on, that they could come up with different results, isn't it? So in the same way, the Buddha took a different approach. And his approach was finding out the source of suffering, not finding out what is God, who is God, or whatever, who created the world. No, he wasn't interested in that. That would require a different type of meditation, maybe. But so, the Buddha's whole emphasis was in trying to. He was very practical. He wanted to understand the nature of suffering. Because you can look all around and see the suffering of so many types that people experience, even animals, human beings, physical sufferings, mental sufferings. And so he took that kind of angle for his research. The Buddha was a research scientist. So he took 6 years out of his life to research. And he followed certain previous teachers, and these teachers taught him their kind of meditation, which is mainly just try to experience infinite space, or kind of find God through infinite light, or whatever. So this was their approach. The Buddha tried that, but he wasn't satisfied. So he went off on his own. This is a very good example of what I just mentioned before. He went off on his own. And his approach was to find out the cause of suffering. So eventually he had to give up even practicing with these other ascetics because he found out that wasn't suitable for what he wanted to find out. So anyway, you all know the story. So he sits under the Bodhi tree, and then basically he, he said, why should I wander around the country asking other people for the truth? I'm also a human being. Let me sit down and look inside. So that's what he did. Anyway, so his particular emphasis and approach was to find out the cause of suffering, or to understand suffering in all of its very deepest levels. Now, science wants to understand suffering too, but they're very limited. How to cure a headache, how to cure COVID, how to do a vaccine. But the Buddha's exploration of suffering goes much, much deeper. Because even if people get cured from diseases, if they haven't cured the disease of the mind, then they're going to get those diseases and sicknesses over and over again also. So, the Buddha really wanted to go to the very root of the problem. So, that's why we already mentioned about the practice of meditation, and it's so he was a scientist, a research scientist. And what's he researching? He's researching this body and mind, but especially the mind. He was a mental researcher and wanted to find out that the essential root of suffering that lies deep within the mind. Because no one else seemed to be really interested in that. So that's, he came up with his step-by-step method of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And in that, if you've read the sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, at the very beginning of the sutra, he starts out with, this is the direct way. The direct way. Not beating around the bush. This is the direct way to the overcoming of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, for the abolishing of ignorance, and for the arising of wisdom, and entering the path to liberation. So the key there is a direct path. Many other forms of meditation kind of, beat around the bush, go around in circles, and maybe eventually arrive, at the truth. But the Buddha, said this is the direct way, because it goes directly inside. And those are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We've already been talking about mindfulness of the body is the first one, because the mind is operating through this body. So if we want to reach the mind, we have to go through the body. Just as if there's a buried treasure deep within a cave, you have to go into the entrance of the cave first. And then you have to then find the buried treasure inside the cave. So, the mindfulness of the breathing, and then the other aspects of mindfulness of the body, such as contemplating the postures. So after, the Buddha talked about sitting down, keeping the back straight, and watching the breathing helps to get to the body. In other words, you're being aware of the breath coming in from outside, and then going in to the body, coming back out. So mindfulness, the breathing helps to find the body. Before, the mind was floating around out there, and so now it's found the body, found the tip of their nostrils. on the expanding and contracting of the breathing. And then once finding the body, get under the skin, or the 4 postures. I'm sitting, standing, walking, laying down. The various movements, walking, bending, stretching, keeping the mind fixed or connected with, the external body. And then once the concentration is sufficiently established, or a more continuous mindfulness, then it gets underneath the skin, where the Buddha had us contemplate 32 body parts. And that's just another way of keeping the attention on the body. This is my head here, body here, skin, teeth, nails, other organs, and so on. So that's, again, it's just keeping the attention on the body. And then he even breaks that down further. What are these body parts made of? And the earth element, water element, fire element, wind element. Or you could say, I prefer to say that he understood that it's made up of cells and atoms and electrons, basically energy. I mean, you have to infer that when you understand what the 4 element vibrations are. Then you understand it's just vibrations of energy, which we then interpret as feel as something being solid, just like elements of chemistry, right? So you have all these chemistry, this chart, right? And depending on the number of electrons going around the atom, you got iron, phosphorus, whatever, all zinc, all these different things, right? So in the same way, because of the different vibrations, you got a foot, you got a hand, you got a head, and you got all these different kind of organs. But basically it was, come down to just compressed energy. Now again, the Buddha didn't actually say compressed energy in a sutta, but you have to infer that through your own contemplation and putting 2 and 2 together and things like that. And in your actual experience, of course. But anyway, after getting centered in the body, and while doing that, getting the mind intensely concentrated in the body, because that's very intense concentration. You're going from the external, to inside, then you're going from gross things to subtler things, to subtler things, to subtler things. So in order to do that, the mind has to be, it's like a microscope being turned up from the power of 5 to the power of 10 to the power of 50 to the power of 100. And then finally an atom smasher, that smashes the atom and then actually feels the body as just pure energy. And that is an actual experience that people can have when they develop their concentration and mindfulness. Well, you might say, well, what's the use of that? What do you mean the body's just pure energy? What's the use of that? Is that going to help me find a job? Well, again, Dhamma is not necessarily about finding a job, but it's about understanding the nature of suffering and the nature of perception and so on. So anyway, while you're doing that, you have then these feelings, painful and pleasant and neutral feelings that are constantly arising. So then the research said, well, what are these feelings? I found out what the body was, and now what are these feelings? And these feelings are just different intensities of those material vibrations. Some are felt as being painful, some are felt as being pleasant, but these are also not absolute values. They're values that we've learned to a certain extent. And it's not only the body painful feelings, but it's the feelings that you get from hearing sounds, seeing things, smelling things, touching things, which sometimes can cause more problems than just physical suffering or attachment. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then from the nature of feelings, seeing how they're just, they arise dependent on conditions, contact, painful and pleasant feelings. They just last a few seconds or longer, but if you cling to them, then they tend to last. If you focus on them, then they tend to get even more, can get more intense, and we're struggling against them. And then you have the thoughts. The sensations are what trigger off our thoughts. Because if you have a painful feeling somewhere, immediately you're going to say, "Oh, that's a pain in my knee. I've been sitting too long. Maybe I better stand up," or trigger off all kind of other kind of thoughts. And the thoughts lead to some kind of action. So it's this domino effect. You see that conditioning. And then so you become aware of the mental states, such as happiness. If you're feeling happy, oh, the mind is happy now. But 3 seconds later, it can be sad. Or 5 seconds later, it can be confused. Or in 1 minute, it could be concentrated. In the next minute, you could lose that concentrated and become scattered. So these mental states are always changing and also dependent on conditions. And you see that we're not really in total control of them because of the accumulated habits and ways that we've been responding our whole life, and then even influences from previous life too. So anyway, that was his research into his feelings, mind states, and then the subtle Dhammas. That's a little bit more difficult to understand. But this comes to one of the main subjects of what he called Vipassana meditation. So this kind of meditation is called Vipassana meditation. Now many people call it mindfulness meditation. It starts as mindfulness. There's different levels of mindfulness. Actually, there's 3 levels. There's mindfulness, ordinary mindfulness. Okay, I'm sitting now. Breath is coming in, breath is going out. So you're kind of mindful of each moment. That's kind of ordinary mindfulness. Oh, thinking, hearing. But then as you enter the flow of moment-to-moment attention, you become concentrated. Now the mind is concentrated in that flow from moment to moment because it's no longer distracted by sleepiness or by unimportant wandering thoughts or restlessness or desires and aversions and so on. You've kind of gotten beyond those at this point, at least for the most part. And so that ordinary mindfulness becomes concentrated mindfulness or concentrated awareness. And then there's a little formula I have. Mindfulness plus concentration equals vipassana. So vipassana is even a more advanced level than just ordinary mindfulness, and it's a more advanced level than just concentration without mindfulness. But when you have concentration combined with mindfulness, or mindfulness supported by concentration, it becomes high octane. You know high octane, right? The gas tank. So vipassana is high octane mindfulness. I mean, just boost it up to altogether another level because of the concentration. And the stronger the concentration, if it's first jhana concentration, it's okay. If it's second jhana concentration, it's more powerful. If it's third jhana concentration, it's more powerful. And if it's fourth jhana concentration, it's enough to attain enlightenment. More on that later. Anyway, that's just a general kind of viewpoint. But anyway, so vipassana means seeing reality as it is. It's called yata bhuta jnana dasana, or simply vipassana. So vipassana is a word that is combined of two things. Passana is the Pali word for seeing, and vi is a prefix that means to divide up, or seeing things separately, seeing things in its parts. So like when you apply vipassana to the body, you don't see a whole body. You see, well, there's an arm over here, there's an arm over here, there's a head over here, there's a leg over here, there's a leg over here. When you put them all together, you say body. But if you take them all apart, do you say body? If there's a leg laying on the ground in a cemetery or someplace, and a leg here, and a leg 30 feet over there, and an arm 100 feet over there, and a head over, you call it a body? No, you say parts of a body. So, in the same way, that's a rudimentary, or that's a kind of a beginning level of kind of vipassana, which is part of the body contemplation. But it has to do with perception and so on. So anyway, but in particular in vipassana meditation, seeing reality as it is means seeing the five aggregates. That means the body-mind process. Seeing the body-mind process as it's happening under the microscope. And that's why you can't see it without the meditation practice. Just as the way you can't see cells, molecules, and atoms without a microscope. Because they have a subtler vibratory range that our eye and senses cannot pick up. So also the subtlety of the five aggregate process also requires a concentrated focus. So the five aggregates are really the main object of vipassana meditation, because it's the five aggregates that we take to be me, mine, and myself, and we cling to them. We have a strong attachment to them. And the first one is the physical body. Well, let's say the material form. But it includes the physical body, but not only. It includes, when I look at that, that's a material form. That mat, or that clock, or this. It looks like something that exists. So it's material form. That you see with the eye or hear a sound. The sound you're hearing now is material form. That means it's some kind of molecules or atoms or electrons in wavelengths that strike your ear, and so it has a material quality to it, and that's why it's called a material form. So anyway, I know for people who are not familiar with this, it may sound too kind of complicated and so on. And it is kind of, but as you get to understand it, it becomes easier. But it's important for developing insight into illusion and the nature of illusion and how we've become duped into clinging and becoming attached to things. So the material form, this body is the external shell, as we already talked about that. And then the next aggregate is feelings. And we've already talked about those too. Those are how these forms feel. Some of them feel painful, some of them feel pleasant. And the majority of them just feel neither pleasant nor unpleasant. That means they're kind of neutral. It's like white noise, right? You're all familiar with white noise. So you no longer pay attention too much to it because you've gotten so familiar with it and it's not particularly painful or pleasant. It's, there, like or a fan going on. In the meditation hall, maybe you get used to the fan, the heater, and that it's producing heat and helping to keep you warm so, you don't get angry at it, right? So you get used to it. And so, you can hear the different sounds go on, but it doesn't really disturb the mind. So those are called neutral forms, neutral feelings. But then based on these feelings, the perceptions arise. Not only the feelings, based on the material form, the perception arises. So perception is the third of the aggregate. And this is the way the mind translates material vibrations into objects. That it creates an object out of what is essentially just an empty kind of vibration. Because look, close your eyes right now. Close your eyes. Okay? Now you're just hearing some sound. But yet in your mind, you're having a perception that it's a person talking. Or more specifically, Bhante, Rahula talking. Is it? Does that come into anybody's mind when they hear this voice? Okay, that's a perception. But ideally, it's just a vibration. Somebody who doesn't know me out of nowhere, if I go into Walmart with 100 people, and I'm in the next aisle and I say something, no one's going to say that's Bhante Rahula, right? Because they haven't identified a face with a sound and a name. But of course, we learn that as we grow up. So all these perceptions with names and labels I learned as a baby and carried on through life. And these are recreated each time. And sure, there's reality connected with that, and we have to have that really to kind of basically live and to communicate, right? But people get overly attached to those things and take them to be somehow absolute truths, and then create kind of all kinds of karma about them. And I'll give some example in a minute. The one I like the most is the example of, and this is where also like and dislike comes in. Beauty or ugliness. So everything we've experienced, because of a certain experience or a condition, we consider some things ugly, some things beautiful, some things good, some things bad, some things I like, some things I don't like. And each person is going to be different in that regard, depending on where they were brought up. If you were born in China, you have certain likes, dislikes, beliefs. If you're born in America, you might have different dislikes, likes, and beliefs. Or India, or any place else. Or even within a country, a certain region, a certain family. Depending on all that, that's why every person in the world is kind of unique. And no one will like or dislike the same things in the exact same intensity or have the exact same reactions. But yet people cling to their beliefs and ideas. So I'll give you that example of two people go into a museum, art gallery. And they see some Rembrandts there or something. Or maybe there's a Rembrandt, maybe there's a Van Gogh painting. Because I remember when I was in the Prado Museum in Spain back in 1971, I heard some people arguing about a painting. It stuck in my mind. I don't particularly care for paintings that much myself anyway. But anyway, so one man was looking at this, and I don't know if it was a Rembrandt or Van Gogh. He said, "Look at this painting. Wow, it's one of the masterpiece, one of the best paintings in the world." And some guy next to him was saying, I won't repeat the word, but it's a 4-letter word, right? And that person took offense. "What?" And they started a fight. Had to be broken up. Where first they were shouting, and it almost got to a point of shoving it. The museum guard had to come over and break it up. So what are these guys? Wow. But it was attachment, right? So these guys were attached to what they thought was the best. But somebody else had a different opinion. So therefore, nothing has absolute value as being, good, bad, beautiful, ugly, this and this and that. These are all superimposed values that society and the world has created over millenniums of evolution and so on, and passed on through, conditioning and so on. But yet people cling to it as being real, and they'll fight to the death, even over foods, over music, over all the sensory things. People have killed each other over because one didn't like what the other one did. The classic example of, back in the 60s or 70s, and rock and roll and country music or something, people fought each other and even were shot over, playing too loud of music that somebody else didn't like. So you see, it's attachment to these perceptions, when actually they don't mean anything. They're all, they were created for useful purpose, to live in life, but not to fight and kill over. And that also applies to religious beliefs, political beliefs, philosophical beliefs. And people get clinging to them. And then it leads to, all this suffering. So that's the importance of trying to understand how the mind has created this scenario. So the perception, once you have the perception, you look around and all you're seeing is perceptions. Just turn your head like this. You see, 20, 30, 40, 50 different kind of objects, and the mind has a name for every one of them. Doesn't it? Want to practice? Okay. So that's what I had you doing this morning in the walking, when I had you turn the head, and then, immediately you say, "Oh, that's the window curtain," or "That's the Bodhi tree," or whatever. So that's a perception. And the mind recreates it. It has to be recreated in each moment, because it's a perception. It's like a flash bulb that goes off, and it vanishes because you're looking at something else and it's gone. But every time the senses contact the same vibration, it's automatically recreated in the brain because of the habits and the memory. And then we take action upon them. And so all of our bodily actions, whether you're going to smile or frown or flip somebody the finger or whatever, go chase and run after things, is all based on the attachment to the perceptions and the amount of desire and aversion that we've accumulated toward wanting to have these things. But again, the main idea is this is all conditioned. And we basically programmed our bodies and minds to believe these things because we've been taught, and no one has really taught us any different. Until somebody like the Buddha comes around. So anyway, so there's 5 aggregates so far. There's the material vibrations, the feelings that arise based when there's contact, when they contact the senses. This perception and feeling arise almost simultaneously. Sometimes the perception first, and you feel, then the feeling arises. But otherwise, it's the feeling and the perception. And then the reaction. And like and dislike is actually the reaction to the perception. And I'm going to give you I'm going to tell my famous avocado story. Now, I know a lot of people know it, but some might not have heard it. But it was a very eye-opener for me when I was a kid. And it had all the Buddhist teachings in it. So when I was a young boy growing up in California, we lived near an avocado orchard, and in California, and so there were lots of avocados. We could go pick them off the ground, But and my mother knew that avocados were healthy things, so she used to serve them for like a salad a couple times a week in the season. But for some reason, I didn't like avocados. I kind of hated them. I don't know why. Maybe I choked to death on an avocado seed in a previous lifetime or something. I don't know. But anyway, so whenever my mother just told me we're going to have avocados for dinner, a chill went up my spine. Oh my God, I don't know that again, And I suffered. But we had a cat. And the cat seemed to like avocados. So whenever my mother told me we were having avocados for dinner, I would go outside and find the cat and bring him inside the house. And he used to sit underneath the kitchen table. So then when my mother actually brought the avocado, and I saw it, brought the plate, and I saw it, another chill went up my spine. So far I've suffered in 3 ways. Just hearing the word avocado, I suffered. Then thinking about it, a whole afternoon for a couple hours I was thinking about it. Am I going to get this cat? I got to find it. And then seeing the avocado, and then actually putting it on my tongue and try to chew it. I'd mix it with some other, I would kind of have a gag reflex. And I don't know, the smell, not too much. I don't know if I had a really aversion to the smell. I think probably a little bit. And if I rubbed it on my skin, I didn't really feel anything too much. But anyway, so I suffered at least 5 ways. By hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and thinking about it. And because I thought avocados were evil. But my mother and father and brother, they were woofing them down. They liked them. So, why am I suffering so much and they're liking them? But anyway, whenever my parents weren't looking, I would put a piece of avocado under the table and the cat would eat it. Then we couldn't watch TV until we finished our dinner. Because in those days there was only one TV in the house, in the den, family room, right? Old black and white TV. So everyone else had gone to watch their favorite programs, Ozzie and Harriet, and all these 50s TV programs. And then I would feed the rest of the avocado to the cat. Then I would go to the den, say, "Look, Ma, I finished my dinner." She said, "Good little boy." So what did I do? What did I do? I told a lie. See, so that's the point. Because we cling to our ideas of what is good and what is bad, that will lead us to telling lies, in worst case scenarios, even killing, because that's happened too, hasn't it? And every other kind of unskillful action, because of the clinging to that idea that they were bad, simply because I didn't understand it. Now, that's not the end of the story. The good part is, then when I went to India many years later, and I started meditating, and going to a meditation course, and hearing lectures on the nature of the mind and so on, and how the mind has got caught up in all of that, I said, I'm going to test this Dhamma now. I'm going to see if I can really change my attitude toward avocados. Change these old conditioned reflexes. So I got a bag of avocados and sat down. And first I mixed it with some other food, and I kind of forced myself to eat. I hold my nose, and I would gag a little bit in the beginning. But I kept on saying, it's all in the mind, it's all in the mind. Avocados are good, avocados are good. And then little by little I could, that gag reflex kind of went away. And then I could finally take my finger off my nose, still mix it with a little food. And then this went on for a couple of weeks. But then finally, I was able to eat the avocado without mixing it with other food. And also my yoga teacher was extolling the virtues of avocados, saying how they're one of the best fruits. I mean, he was doing this back in 1971 when avocados, most people in the world didn't even know what an avocado was. So because of that, he was saying that they're one of the best fruits. I said, well, they're one of the best fruits. I had to learn to like them, right? And so anyway, that's how I overcame my aversion to avocados. So if you can overcome your dislike to avocados, I suppose you could overcome your dislike to a lot of other things too. And so this is precisely what, the beginning point of, understanding the nature of suffering. Because for most people, that's where a lot of their suffering happens, is they're clinging to these likes and dislikes and forcing your likes and dislikes onto others. And if the others don't buy your opinions and likes and dislikes, then what happens? They pull out the guns and the knives and everything else, don't they? So, probably more suffering comes from people fighting over likes and dislikes than, other things. So that's why it's a very important aspect about understanding the mind, and also for overcoming sort of the very gross types of suffering and unhappiness. And also it frees you up to enjoy the world more too. Because most people, they close out half the world, isn't it? Because of their imagined dislike or hate certain types of people, certain types of religions, certain types of beliefs. And then people go into groups, coffee lovers in one group, tea lovers in another group, cat people in one group, dog people in another group. So, people tend to hang out with the groups of people that kind of believe and act kind of similar, right? And the same is true in the Dhamma. So when you start to do Dhamma, you probably hang out with other people that are also interested in meditation, because otherwise you don't have much to talk about. So like that. Anyway. So the five aggregates, let me just finish that. So we have the form, material form. What's next?
Feelings.
After feelings?
Perception.
After perception?
Volition.
Yeah, volition means the reactions, basically, the habits and the reactions that we, whether it's a physical reaction of lifting your arm up to scratch an itch, or to turn your head to look at something, or to think about something. And the last one is consciousness. Now, consciousness is the hardest one to understand, because it's more elusive and it's more subtle. Each one of these aggregates is subtler than the one before it. So material form is the grossest one, because that's the one we initially feel through the senses. That definite impact, boom. And then the feeling arises, that's also can be felt strong. But the perceptions, to clearly see a perception arise, is more difficult. And then the reactions. But anyway, we can observe them. And the consciousness is basically, consciousness is also a profound phenomenon. And it's not easy to describe consciousness in one word, because there's different aspects about consciousness. But we're talking about the dualistic consciousness, subject-object consciousness, which every time you feel something, you have the feeling that you are here looking or smelling an object that is kind of out there. So it's this dualistic consciousness, subject-object. And we take that to be me, and mine, and myself. We take this body to be me, mine, or myself. We look in a mirror, that's me. Or look down, that's mine, my me. So we assume that we're the owner of it. And the same with our feelings. That's my painful feeling. Or this painful feeling is happening to me. And then the perceptions, we cling to it. I like this one, I don't like that one. And then your reactions. But behind all that is the sense of there's an I that's doing it. Or there's an I that's hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, thinking, deciding, acting, reacting, and so on. So that's the consciousness, or the five aggregates. And that is what the Buddha, because we take these five aggregates to be me, mine, and myself, that is the taking up of the burden of suffering. Actually, there's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya called the burden. The Buddha was talking to the monks, says, monks, I'll teach you the burden, the laying hold of the burden and the putting down of the burden, and the way leading to the putting down of the burden. So you know what a burden is, right? Like a heavy load on your back. So what is the burden? It's material form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. What is the taking up of the burden, putting it on your back? They're me, they're mine. Clinging to them as I, me, and mine. What is the putting down of the burden? Relinquishing that same attachment, detaching from them, is the laying down of the burden. And the burden means the suffering that they cause because of our clinging. And then the path leading to the laying down of the burden is the Eightfold Path. It's a very nice sutta. Anyway, so, this is really the focus of Vipassana meditation. And I wanted to mention about the consciousness. Because especially consciousness is the hardest one to understand. Most people can kind of somewhat detach from their body. They can kind of, sitting, you kind of watch it. And, to some extent you can kind of detach from it. And even the feelings that arise, the painful feelings and itches, you can kind of learn how to just watch them and keep some distance from that. And this body is going to die at some point, and so it's fairly easy to, understand that. And even one's habits and so on. But the consciousness, which is your sense of self, which we've been told all of our life is our soul, if you're a Christian, I guess. That's your soul or your identity or your spirit or whatever people imagine it to be. And that's considered that's what you're going to have after you die. That's going to be your self is going to be with you for eternity in a heaven or a hell or whatever. Or Buddhist belief, it'll go from life to lifetime, or the Hindu belief. But anyway, so it's the hardest one to understand. But we already saw that the baby, when it's born, it doesn't have this developed sense of I yet. And it even doesn't really have much perceptions and reactions. They're all just instinctual at that point of a young baby. Sure, if it has pain, it might, scratch or cry or something, but these are kind of basic instinctual things. But, a young baby one day, looks at his mother. It doesn't know what its mother is. It knows that there's some milk there that tastes good. That's all. There's something else. But as we've already talked about this, how gradually these perceptions and the likes and the dislikes. But basically consciousness, so this sense of I, consciousness arises and vanishes with each moment of contact. That means each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking. That whole process of the five aggregates arises almost instantaneously. We're talking about nanosecond timings. So basically simultaneously. And we don't see them arising and vanishing because our mind works slowly and we cling to these things that are arising. And they're repeating so fast, they seem to be solid. And this one is very important to understand. It's similar to an animated book. Animated cartoon book. An artist has to draw a separate page for every small little different movement of a cartoon character, right? How many know that? So, you might have to have 50 different drawings and pictures of Donald Duck just going quack, quack. And they're fanned very quickly. And so when they're fanned very quickly across, you don't see that they're really individual, and you see that movement almost like it's some solid movement. Is it? I don't know. Okay, maybe a better example. A motion picture reel of film. So before digital came, they had movie rolls. And the movie roll consisted of individual frames, like slides. You've taken slides, pictures, right? So the movie reel is just many, many slides with a little space between it. You know, film with individual frames. One by itself doesn't mean anything. But when that roll of film is flashed through a projector with light and at a speed where you don't no longer see the spaces in between the frames, it appears to be a solid flowing scene, right? But it's basically an illusion. And when you're in the movie theater, you start getting attached to the characters in the movie, right? Cowboys and the Indians, or some steamy love scene, or whatever it is. Because it looks kind of real. And most movie theaters are kept dark, aren't they? Come on, give me some response. What happens when you flip the big lights on in a movie theater? The movie doesn't become interesting anymore, does it? Or what happens if the movie projector gets a jam and then starts going on slow motion? You can almost see that staccato-like film going on the slow motion, right? How many have seen that? That's impermanence. That's actually a very good analogy. When we tune in to the flow of impermanence, and you pay particular attention to how quickly things are rising and vanishing, you can almost have that kind of experience of seeing what our normal consciousness, how it's just this kind of rising and vanishing of different pictures. That's the impermanence. That's the insight into impermanence, actually. And it doesn't appear so real anymore. The objects that are there don't hold your fascination anymore, because you understand it as to be basically a kind of an illusion. So this is the kind of insight that arises when you are developing vipassana meditation, and especially the anicca sanya, the perception of impermanence. And that's what I've been trying to, suggest or, encourage you to start opening up to notice that. So basically, and so the sense of self, the sense of I, I've already mentioned this, arises with each moment of contact, these five aggregates. So the consciousness, the sense that I am hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, thinking, arises with each of those moments, but those moments are occurring faster than an IBM supercomputer is processing information. The mind is processing these mind moments through the nervous system. Millions and millions of them per second. And of course we have, our brain is too slow and is not wired to ordinarily perceive it. And that's why we can't. And under ordinary circumstances. And primarily the circumstance is because we're clinging, or our mind is, for one thing, half asleep, and it's very sluggish, and we don't have the sustained concentration that's required to do that, because we get bored very easily, or lose our energy. So that's why it's very, very difficult to directly develop the kind of mindfulness and concentration to kind of get a glimpse of that. Or if not even to get a perfect glimpse, at least to get an idea that, something is happening like that. So anyway, the reason why we take the ego to be real is because we don't see it broken up. The sense of self arises with each moment of consciousness, and it ceases with that moment of consciousness. But then another one arises up immediately after that and vanishes. And another one arises up immediately after that and vanishes. But because we don't see the arising and vanishing, we think that ego or sense of I is somehow solid and continuous. That's the illusion. And so that's why this vipassana technique, the Buddha, cultivated this vipassana meditation, this kind of mindfulness meditation, specifically for that purpose, not any other purpose, for that purpose, to understand, the nature of consciousness, and then how the mind has been duped and conned. I like to use those words. We've been conned into believing that the ego is real. Or we've been conned into thinking that all these objects of the world are going to bring happiness and so on. I know people don't like to hear those words, but actually it's true. And we've been conned because of the ignorance. And because of society and consumeration, saying you can't live without this, you can't live without that. You got to have this. The whole consumer society of the world is promoting this idea of illusion. And it's gotten to the point where it can't be rolled back because the whole world and the whole economy is based on this kind of illusion. And thinking that everything has to be faster and better and more colorful than everything else, Of course, that's a whole other argument I don't want to get into. But, so I'm just saying these things to kind of to try to, get a kind of broader view of really what we're up against in terms of when we're practicing meditation. And that's why it's so difficult. That's why most people find meditation quite difficult. It's not easy. Because of all this ingrained conditioning that's been going on not just since you were alive, but many lifetimes of evolution, which has been passed on through genes and heredity and everything. A certain amount of these traits and all that, they're all passed down. And also as part of what is called collective consciousness. There's individual consciousness and there's collective consciousness. So like everybody, most people in one country, they have a similar kind of consciousness because they believe the same things, they act in basically the same kind of ways and so on. And everybody knows that a toothache is painful and this and that, so certain things are deemed painful, and it's true. No one thinks a toothache is pleasant. But you could turn an itch into a pleasant thing to watch, or some other things. So actually, I gave a sutta 2 or 3 weeks ago. Somebody was listening to the sutta class on Wednesday. I talked about the sutta of the mastering the feelings, where the Buddha said, one who mastered the feelings, if they want to turn a pleasant feeling into a painful feeling, they could do that if they want. If they wanted to turn a painful feeling into a pleasant feeling, they could do that if they want, because they mastered their mind. You want an example of that? I guess the time's getting away from us, so we better close up shop. Okay, since I mentioned it. So let's say the average person, if you're walking down the street and you see a rotting corpse of a deer or a dog, what would most people's reaction be?
Disgusting.
Yeah, they would kind of turn away. They wouldn't want to look at it, right? Because it's a painful subject, because it reminds them of mortality. But a meditator, if they're going along and saw that, they go, wow, look at that. Wow, perfect, impermanence. That's going to happen to me too. That's going to happen to this body. There's no difference. So he could take what might have been a painful feeling before, when he was ignorant, and turn it into a pleasant feeling, or at least a neutral feeling, and get insight at it. So, that's just one gross type of example. Or like, I had a painful feeling with avocados, and I was able to turn it into a pleasant feeling. So, anyway, that's just, that means, but most people can't do that because their mind has been fixed and programmed in clinging to these ideas, and no one wants to bother. It's harder to change. It's easier just to go with the flow of the conditioning rather than try to change. And so that's why most people don't bother changing until, it's down to life or death, and then maybe they might change. Okay, I think that'll be all for this talk, because it's gone on too long. Sorry I talked too much. So if any questions have come up from any of that discussion, you can write them down for the questions and answer session tonight. But the reason why I'm explain things like this, because this is actually, what we're trying to do in meditation. And having some kind of intellectual idea of these things, that when you sit to meditate, your mind can then kind of remember that and kind of tune to that. Because again, this particular meditation is about understanding the nature of suffering. If you want to understand or find out who God is, you better go to some other temple or church. So, anyway, so we'll go ahead and, let all that excitement of looking up here, close your eyes, just close your eyes, take a deep, slow breath, bring your attention to feel your buttocks and feet pressing the floor. Try to let go of that outward-looking excitement. Hold the air in the lungs. And breathe out, feel that relaxation, the mind relaxing, resting in the present moment. Your buttocks and feet pressing the floor. Okay, now, you can mindfully stand up. We're going to do a short standing and then a session of walking around. Try to relieve any buildup of pain in your legs.